introduction. He'll stand up before I get through and make a comment, I'm sure, but, we also love him, we're gonna miss him. Actually, I'm doing the favor here and getting the honor of introducing Jack. I've had him speak before, and we're all on he's been on the program committee with us for years, and we finally twisted his arm and said we need one more dose. If you believe that, we're asking for a dose of Jack, but, tell you a little bit of something, but most of you know a whole lot about him. Jack was born in in Charleston, South Carolina, in 1944. They threw him out. We got him though. He was raised in Kingspport and graduated from DB in 1963. After he and Alan Hubbard had roomed together for a number of years down at UT, Jack was invited to get a ticket from UT because he thought it was more fun to go play Army than to study. Just like my brother that got the same invitation from ETSU, and both of them turned out great. So, but he told the tale on himself one time, and I just haven't forgotten him. So he joined the U.S. Army in 1967. Went through basic training in Fort Campbell. Finished first in the brigade of 1,800 men. So you know he was smart. He just had other things on his mind. And knowing him all these years, it was probably was of the female type. He went to OCS Field Artillery in November '62, became second lieutenant, finished fourth in his class. He was married in 1967, went to helicopter training in January '68, and had one daughter. His first child was a daughter. Went to first CAD division to Vietnam. Is that Vietnam? Is that what? I'm reading his handwriting, by the way. You know how well doctors and lawyers write. The E Battalion, 82nd Artillery. He flew slicks and scouts. That means he flew Hueys, troop transports, and Loaches, which were the scout birds. God wasn't through with him yet over there, though. He was shot down 4 times. And he came home walking instead of in a box, and we're thankful for that. Went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina after that. He was the first, his second child was born. I can't tell what it says you were, but anyway. Went to UT Law School in '75, trial attorney for 45 years. Born the Tennessee Supreme Court for a 6-year term, and chaired the Fund for Client Protection for 2 years. Fellowship Tennessee and American Bar Associations. Member of this club for over 45 years. Past president maybe twice. Am I dreaming?
That's my daddy's one.
His daddy and him, so he may be the only daddy-son team in here. So let's give him credit there. Jack, we love you, and if I need to, I'll put some money in for those IOUs to buy them off. No, it would be paying your debts, so I'm not sure I've got enough. Yes, sir?
I just wanted to add to this.
It's gonna cost you $10.
He's my good friend.
Oh, come on. Jack, come on forward.
You know, Jack has the distinction of being shot down twice in one day.
Same LZ.
Yeah.
Jack Vaughn.
I want to remind you all that this is not my last meeting, but I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to my last meeting. I hope it's better than this. At least I got your fried chicken. I have several claims to fame. I followed probably the greatest president of Kiwanis Club ever was, Jim Cornell, and he assigned me to the joke. We had a committee and I'm not a good joke teller. I'm a storyteller. I've done several things in my life that I'm proud of, and one is my marriage and my family, and the second is my profession, and the third is being a Kiwanian for 45 years. I think that you guys are special. You do good work, and I wish I had a vocabulary could congratulate you, but you don't want to listen to me. Needs to be said, this thing is last 1 hour. I'm moving and I got all this stuff. So if you have to leave, leave. I will not take offense. Just be a little bit low because I may shoot at you. But thank you for all the courtesy that you've given me. Thank you for 45 years of a lot of damn fun. And you men and women are the best. And I look out there and I see Kay Huddle. Kay and I grew up together. Then her husband, I met her husband. I was in ROTC as a freshman, and Wayne was a senior. And the only thing he did was yell at me. But I did pretty good because I learned how to march. But I could go through each one of y'all and do the same thing. John McKinley, as you well know, doesn't give me any breaks, which is I like that because I don't deserve any. Anyway, let's get this thing on the road here.
Let's welcome John. When you're talking about law, there's a cast of characters. God bless you. That's right, Jack. That's all right. Just hang in there. The American sidearm was a 45. The NBA sidearm was a 9mm. 9mm just won't go through anything. The weapon of choice for the NBA was an AK-47. This thing, you throw it in the mud, pick it up, and shoot it. It's like you hold in $1 grand. You just couldn't get it to stop shooting. This is not, I did not bring this back from Vietnam because all those over there had an automatic switch where you fire on the automatic fire, and you can't do that. So I just bought this when I came back. This is an SKS. It was very rare. It's a single shot, pull trigger for every shot you do. And mostly the South Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, use these. And this one was taken in combat and brought home. Our weapon of choice, M16. Not as good as AK-47 as far as durability, as far as throwing it in the mud and stuff like that. But the bullets were so light, the 223, that you could carry a ton of these things. And you put more bullets down range, the better you are. Well, prior to getting in this thing, we've got to have an understanding. There were hundreds of thousands of men and women who went to Vietnam and accomplished their jobs in a very brave manner. My experience is no different than theirs. My story is not meant to be self-serving, but to honor those who served. And finally, we shall not delve into the politics of the war. You've been on a Boeing 707 for over 24 hours when the pilot comes over the intercom and says, fasten your seatbelts and be prepared for violent maneuvers. We're on short final of Benoit. The landing was uneventful except as the wheels touched the ground, you noticed how damn scared you were. As you exit the aircraft, it felt as if you'd stepped into an oven, and the humidity was near 100%. There was a peculiar odor in the air. It was a mixture of things burning, things rotting, and gunpowder, and a peculiar odor that you couldn't identify, but you would. The heat, the stench, and the fear will be with you for the next 12 months. Welcome to the Nam. As you're going down the ramp, you notice a group of men to your left front who have been yelling and screaming and shouting enthusiastically. And they've fallen silent and have strange looks about their faces. This too you didn't understand, but you would. You're taken to the 91st Replacement Depot for an assignment to a division. And I was going down to the division roster one day, and there it was, Vaughn Jack M., 1st Lieutenant, 1st Cavalry Division. A wave of depression swept over me because all the way through flight school you've been told you do not wish to be assigned to the CAV because the mortality rate is high, especially among aviators. Certainly a picture is worth 1,000 words. Get that thing. Do it on the picture. No, sorry. The picture right there. There you go. On one-nighter march, one-nighter, six-nighter, my wife and child saw me off to Vietnam at Tri-City Airport. here in Kingspport, Tri-City area. Next slide, please. You're doing good. You're assigned to the CAV, which is stationed there. Base camp is at Viet, which is 9 or 0 miles north of Benoit, Saigon area. You will spend most of your time in the rubber in the upper right-hand corner of the picture. Next slide. So a hooch is, I served some time in Light K. This is a hooch. It's very primitive. You scrounge everything. The wood you see are ammo boxes that we've gotten and beaten apart and made the desk and the shelves and the paneling there. But at least I had a cot and an air mattress. Of course, the air mattress always went flat before the morning came. Next slide. This is the exterior of the hooch in Light K in May of 1969. That blast wall, the sandbags in front of the hooch there, was not there. And we had been getting rocketed all night long. And you never sleep in Vietnam because you just don't. You don't go into that deep REM sleep. And one rocket went long, one went short, and I knew the next one was going to be on top of me. And so I dove for the bunker, which was in the side of the tent. And Don Fagundes, my crew chief, the young man to the right of the picture, he landed underneath me, and I grabbed him by his shorts and threw him into the bunker. And at that time, a 122 millimeter rocket landed right beside that tree on the left-hand side of the picture, and blew me to the back of the tent. In less than 60 days in country, I earned my first Purple Heart. Didn't get anything except a day off. But if it wasn't for that tree, I don't think I'd be here today. And you can see that the white marks of the tree is where the shrapnel hit. And obviously we got busy and built the blast wall, so that would never happen again. Next slide. You're back in Viet. Our call sign was woodpeckers. And everybody laughed at us until they flew with us. We had bird dogs, we had loaches, the little light observation helicopters, and we had the Hueys, the lift ships. And you could see the blast wall in the front of that hooch there. And then along the side of all the buildings, there's sandbags to prevent shrapnel from hitting you. And that's your first line of defense. Incoming starts coming in, hit the floor, and hopefully it wouldn't come in on top of you. But the main thing, you see the little bicycle in the left-hand side of the picture? That's a Ho Chi Minh bicycle. That thing, we took that from a young NVA trooper who didn't need it anymore. And they drive these things, don't ride them, but they push them down the Ho Chi Minh Trail from North Vietnam all the way down to South Vietnam. And that thing can carry up to 600 pounds of food, bullets, whatever. Next slide. Each hooch, primitive as it is, had a urinal in front, which was a 55-gallon drum sunk in the ground. And when I first got to the cab, we didn't have any women on post. No hooch maids, no donut dollies, no nothing. So we didn't have any tin around those things. But when they let us bring the women on post, they had to put up that barrier there so we could maintain our privacy. Next slide. Shower. So say everything was scrounged from Vietnam. The two bomb-like things are F-4 Phantom drop tanks that we scrounged. The water tank was a water trailer that got mortared, and we couldn't use it for drinking water anymore. So we built a stand for it and made a water holder. This is in the rainy season. Everything is wet and muddy. And you can see, again, 55-gallon drums around the shower in case incoming starts coming in, and you can get down and hopefully it won't come in on top of you. Next slide. This is the fourth odor that you couldn't identify. This is the Vietnam privy. They burned human waste in Vietnam, and that stuff stunk. I don't know whether y'all have seen Platoon, but they cut a 55-gallon drum, cut it in half, slide it underneath there, put diesel fuel in it, and when it gets full, I don't know who measures how full it has to be, they pull it out and burn it. And somebody has to stand there and stir that stuff. Wasn't me. Next slide. As you exited my hooch, the building on the right with the blue roof is the operations center, and we had a first light briefing at 6 o'clock every morning, and got our missions. The building in the middle with the canvas dome thing is where we repaired our land vehicles. And the big barn over here on the left is where we repaired our helicopters. And that helicopter in the middle there is my friend Weird Harold. And we called him Weird Harold for two reasons. He developed this thing where he could kick the aircraft out of trim, and Charlie was always told to lead the aircraft. And he'd kick it out of trim, came down. It looked like he was going forward, but actually he was going down sideways. And so that was weird, so we call it Weird Harold. And the next thing is when he became operations officer, his sergeant got this dog and named him Weird Harold. Well, Weird Harold turned out to be a girl. And we questioned why they didn't know that, but they didn't. But anyway, next slide. Enlisted Men's Hooch Club that we built toward the end of my tour, the reason I put that slide in there is that every building had to have a bunker that was big enough to hold the number of people that were supposed to be in the building. And the green sandbags is the bunker. Next slide. We were woodpeckers. Every hooch had a kind of in the middle, had a kind of a lounge. One side, this side, we had a television set, and the other side, I'll show you in a minute, had a bar. This thing was painted. That is a pallet that they used to load and offload supplies onto a C-130. And I was beer procurement officer at Vietnam, and it was an important thing because water sucked. I mean, it was deaerated, and it tasted like rubber. And it was awful. And beer was very important. Sometimes you just had to brush your teeth with beer. But anyway, 2 weeks, they told us, no beer in Vietnam. You can't get any. So I was flying down on a mission, and I flew over Sanford Pad and saw pallet after pallet of beer, 1,000 cases of beer. I got mad. I was lied to by a field grade officer. God, they're not supposed to do that to a company grade officer. So I came back, got Weird Harold, and we muddied up our, we had woodpeckers painted on the front of our aircraft, and muddied that up, muddied up the tail number. And we went down and liberated, we didn't steal, liberated a pallet of beer. And we came back, hell, we were heroes. All the units around us wasn't getting beer. And so we were all just having a big time. At about 10:30 that night, General Roberts, the commanding general of the CAV, called my commanding officer and asked him, he wanted to see Burrell and Vaughn. And so we posted into the general, and he said, what do you boys know about this beer that was stolen? I said, being a quick-witted Dobbins Bennett graduate, I said, sir, I'm the beer requisition officer of E Battery, 82nd Artillery, and we've been ordering beer, requesting beer for over 3 weeks, and have been told by the field grade officer there was no beer in Vietnam. And sir, if there's no beer in Vietnam, how could I steal any? Fortunately, General Roberts did like you do. He laughed. He said, be that as it may, Captain, I want 7 cases in front of my desk in the morning, in front of my hooch in the morning. He had 15. Next slide. This is the other side. Budweiser was the beer of choice, and of course we didn't have a lot to decorate with, so we nailed up beer cans. We were proud of our bar because it was a solid piece of wood, 3 feet wide, 7 feet long, and a piece of board that big, a solid piece of board, was real rare. Real rare. I don't know where they got it, but I particularly put this picture in. You see the Coke cans in the upper right corner? That's the ratio of Coke to beer that was consumed. Next slide. Flight line at Foot Van, we call this Pecker Pad. And the load you see is that light observation helicopter in the foreground. It was in parallel revetments, and when you parked it, you just ran it in between the two parallel sandbags and 55-gallon drums and shut it down. Obviously, it was to protect against incoming. The Hueys in the background, lift ships, were in L-shaped revetments. Why they put them in L-shaped instead of a parallel, I don't know, but I did that. Now the guys are pushing a modern-day Army mule, and those things were really cantankerous. But what was fun about them is we'd get them out on the runway, and we'd drag race those things. And we did that for a while until we wrecked one, and we couldn't explain how it got wrecked, so we had to quit. Next slide. You're at Pole, petroleum, oil, and lubricant. In Vietnam, you always refuel after a mission. Make sure it's full so it's ready to go on the next mission. And we were on a lift mission. I was flying trail last aircraft. And you refuel with your engine running. One of the main reasons for that is that there's about 200,000 gallons of JP4 to your right, about a 75 to 100 meters away, and you don't want to be sitting there with your engine stopped when they start lobbing in mortars or rockets. And so you always refuel with the engines running so you can get out of there if you have to. Next slide. This is your area of operation. We've been talking about. Viet was the center of the cab. That was where the headquarters was. And it had a brigade of infantry, and a brigade of infantry consists of 3 battalions. This is Quan Loy. We call this place, it was weird. Everything in Vietnam that we had big LZs were on rubber plantations, and the French still ran this plantation, and this had a reddish tint to it. And if you stayed there for long, stationed for there, you get kind of a red tint, become an Indian. But one night I was in a Huey, sitting about where I was taking a picture from, and my friend Charlie Drought, and remember his name, he was in his Cobra about where that little loach is, and we were sitting there talking, and all of a sudden we saw this group of 20 or 30 guys running down the runway, just a gang. They weren't any kind of formation. And as they ran past, I keep my mic and it said 4911. Those weren't friendly. He said, "Roger that," and you heard him cranking his Cobra up to flight RPM. Hover down the runway in the front of his Cobra, he had 2 miniguns, 4,000 rounds a minute apiece. Did a right hovering turn and hosed those guys down. Why in the world they didn't stop? They had a Cobra and a slick dead to rights. I don't know. Next slide. North of Quan Loy is a place called Loc Ninh. This is hot area. The trees in the background are in Cambodia. If you want to be John Wayne and get shot at, fly over those trees and I guarantee you get shot at pretty effectively. And this was a special forces camp. When Charlie came down in 75 or 76 and conquered Saigon, he came right through there, down Highway 1 into Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, whatever it is. But we were there that morning. Next slide, please. Because this C-130 had been mortared while it was offloading supplies, and we were there to hunt to see if we could find who did it. And this is what the Scout is. A Scout pilot, I'll talk about it a little bit more, but Scout pilot flies about 2-3 feet above the ground. You follow footprints, blood trails, and your job is to find the enemy and hopefully get out of there. That's what a loach and a Cobra is what they call a hunter-killer team. And most of the time, business was pretty good. Anyway, next slide. To the western side of your area of operation is a place called Tay Ninh. This is the elephants ear section of Cambodia, Cambodian border. Again, the trees in the background, they are in Cambodia. This was also a nasty area. And Tay Ninh was a town where the Cao Dai religion was formed. And beautiful temple, had nice gold things. I hope it's still there. I don't know what the communists did with it, but it was very interesting to see. Next slide. You're landing at Lai Khe. That's where I was when I got in May. And the reason I put this picture, there are 2 reasons. Is we were there in '69, and they'd been Americans here since '64, '65, and during that time, early part of '69, they found concrete, steel reinforced tunnels all underneath that area. Ingenious people. This was also a part of the Iron Triangle. Lai Khe, Cu Chi, and Bearcat, when we first got there, were just packed full of, not me, but when Americans first went over there, were packed with South Vietnamese, the Viet Cong. And it was so bad, they removed the villages and just wiped everything else out. Anyway, next slide. This is the famous Michelin rubber plantation, and South Vietnam is a very beautiful place. And the French were still working these plantations, but they paid a fee to the NVA, VC to get this rubber out. And if you drove Michelin tires during the 60s or 70s, you were supporting Charlie because they were paying the NVA to get this rubber out of here. Next slide. In the middle of your area of operations, a thing called a Razorbacks. It's about 3/4 of a mile to a mile long, and it's just a mountain range. It just pops out in the middle of nowhere. But that was in the middle of your area of operation. This is LZ Dolly's on the far eastern side of this, and you can see, I don't know if you can see it or not, but the bunkers have Rio Grande fence in front of them, and that's to stop the rocket-propelled grenades that hit the fence and explode prior to going into the bunkers and killing the Americans. Each LZ, this was a small LZ, but each LZ of this sort had 2 batteries of artillery, a 105 battery, 6 guns, and a 155 battery, 6 guns. And they had a battalion of infantry. And they did their operations out of this, or within range of these guns. And this was on a, as I say, on a hill. And interesting, next slide. On the western side is a place called Nui Bara, the Black Virgin Mountain. Had a temple on the top of it. And this is flat. Then all of a sudden, 3,500 feet, you got this mountain. And we had a radio relay station on top of it. And sometimes you had to fly up there. Most of the time it was in the clouds. And you kind of hovered real slow, hoping that you would get to see a landing pad before you put a rotor in the side of the mountain. And then when we took off, we kind of fell off the side of the mountain and let just gravity pull us down. It was a guy, we called him Ralph, some old guy, and he'd come out. Sometimes he'd shoot at us, but we'd wave at him, and everybody kind of let him live because Ralph's a good old boy. And so things like that happen. Next slide. Nui Bara, eastern side, much smaller mountain, also another radio relay station. An interesting thing is that I resupplied that place quite frequently. And when I was in law school, there was the old guys would get together and drink coffee. And Bill Phillips is a lawyer down in Rogersville. And Bill kept saying Nui Bara this and Nui Bara that. I said, wait a minute, Nui Bara, Plain Creek Province? Yes, yes, yes. I said, well, I was back at 4 or 5. He said, yeah, I remember you coming in here. And it's small world. Next slide. LZ Jamie just being put in very primitive out there. Just put smack dab in the middle of Highway 1, the highway that ran from Quan Loy, Loc Ninh, all the way down to Saigon. The main reason I put this in here is you see the plastic underneath the last row of sandbags. We learned real quickly that when you put sandbags over a bunker and then the rainy season came, what happens? Sandbags get water, they get heavy, and they go crash in and kill or injure people that's in it. So we put the plastic down before you put your last row of sandbags down. Next slide. LZJ, I received my first ground-to-air fire. I was flying cross-country, young lieutenant, less than 10 days in country, and I was flying cross-country to a familiarization. Scared to death. I was by myself. So where am I going to, I don't know where I am. What do I make a call if I lose an engine or whatever? And I flew down there and I was flying about 2,500 feet. So it was all right. I mean, I was supposed to be safe. And notice this great big huge orange basketball started coming up. And they come up real slow. And then when they pass your aircraft, you can hear as it went through the sound barrier. So, when the guy got on full automatic, he got pop, 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 pop. And being a smart East Tennessee boy, I nosed that thing over and flew it in the ground. I mean, literally, pulled all the power I had, I was heading straight to the ground. And it took me that whole runway to get stopped. I was honking back on the flaring that little aircraft out. But I'll never forget that. Next slide. It's Budok, Special Forces Camp on the Cambodian border. 5 Mountain Yard families, Mountain Yards, Mike Force, Mercenary Force, we paid them. These are the people we screwed when we left. You can see the young boys in the foreground, 2 young boys, and the soldier father in the background, and the mama sons are in the lead-to, which they're cooking, and one of them's over here with the wash. I mean, these people lived there, and they fought there, and they died there. And when we left, heard all kinds of nasty stories of what happened to those people. And it's a crime. Go ahead, next slide. LZ Judy, where you see the rapids, the white there, Charlie used that to cross that's the Song Bay River. And the green part without trees is what we call LZ Judy. Now those trees you see are 150, 175 feet high, triple canopy jungle that's been defoliated by Agent Orange, which will not hurt humans. If you believe that, I got some oceanfront property down Reedy Creek I'd like to sell you. But the problem with this is you'd come in as a 2-ship LZ, the best you could do. And you'd come in and you're 6 to 8 grunts and you'd be max gross. So when you committed to land and you started getting shot at, you had to go on in. You couldn't make a go around because you didn't have enough power. So just once you committed, you landed, and you took off. And the bad thing about it was, if you made it out, the bad thing was you had to go back. And that was terrible. Next slide. LZ Grant in the rainy season. A couple minutes before this picture, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And you can see the shiny tubes in the middle of the picture. Those are 155 millimeter howitzers. That's the width of the barrel. Yeah. Next slide. VFR on top. In the rainy season, the war still went on. And when I first got there was no radar. And you'd take off and try to find a hole to fly up till you got to the top of the clouds. If you couldn't find a hole, you flew up to the clouds hoping you wouldn't run into somebody who was doing the same thing or coming down. But you get on top and then you do that by dead reckoning. You knew the direction to the place you were going, and you knew the distance, and you knew you were traveling 120 knots, and you'd figure it out, and you time it, and you get there, then you start looking for a hole to go through. And if you couldn't find a hole, you would literally put your aircraft in auto rotation. You'd roll it off the throttle and simulate an engine failure to the flight idle detent, because that was a very stable configuration, and you'd auto rotate down, hoping that you would run out of clouds before you hit the ground. Interesting. Pucker factor was awful high. Next slide. Downtown Phuc Viet. I'm going to tell you, this place is typical Vietnamese village. I'll tell you about him in a minute. The big open place on the left is the 5 and 10 cent store. And everything you needed in Vietnam, you needed 3 things. You needed a mirror, you needed a chair, and you needed a plastic bowl. The first sergeant came in and says, gentlemen, or Jack Ralston, not Ralston, I can't remember his last name, and myself, he said, I need $25 a piece. And a couple weeks later, when we went downtown, we found out it cost about $7. But you never say anything to the first sergeant. So the yellow building is a barbershop. You get your hair cut there. And the women, Vietnamese, it's a Vietnamese restaurant there that we weren't allowed to eat there because it wasn't approved. But across the street, there was a Vietnamese restaurant that we could dine. It was 4-star cuisine. This young man here is a hustler. He can get you anything, from a Huey to a Jeep. I mean, when we changed money every so often so Charlie couldn't get our money and use it, they just print more money with different designs. He'd have it before we did. I don't know. I'm serious. Next slide. This is Don Boo. This is about 5 or 6 miles, like Colonial Heights is the Kingspport. But the road there is 90 miles long, and it goes from Phuc Viet down to Benoit. And one night I got a tactical emergency, which meant you went. Don't care what. If the aircraft would take off, you'd go. If the weather sucked, you'd go. And we didn't have any radar. So it was raining so hard that you literally could not feel your hand, see your hand in front of your face. And it was very difficult because the wind was blowing. So we got on this road, turned our landing light on, and hovered down that road 90 miles, 2 feet above the roadway. that was interesting. But it was raining hard, so Charlie couldn't see it. So what the heck? So we get down there, and I'm excited. Gosh, it's going to be a nuclear weapon or something because it's a tactical emergency. Somebody's going to die unless we get this to them. And lo and behold, it was mustard, ketchup, and salad dressing for the officer's open mess. Really made me mad because that's not a tactical emergency. So we flew back to Viet, to Vaughn, and I landed, and by the time I got there, I was livid. And so I stole I did steal it. I took my commanding officer's Jeep, flew to the Division Artillery Tactical Operations Center, and asked who laid on this mission. And this major, who he and I didn't get along at all, he told me I did. And I said, did you know what you were sending me down there for? He said, yes. And I said, do you know that you put a tacky on that? He said, yes. And I hit him. He hit the ground. I pulled my gun and told him to get up. I'd shoot him. I'd kill him. He was yelling, he'll court-martial me. I said, you'll never see it. And so Colonel Munson, the Division Artillery Commanding Officer, came in. He said, what the hell's going on? And so somebody told me what had happened. And so he understood why I was a little bit mad. And my commanding officer came in about that time because my crew chief had been smart and woke my commanding officer up and told him to get down to the top because Vaughn's in trouble. So Colonel Munson says, get Vaughn out of here. And so took me out, and the next morning the major was gone because you don't do that kind of stuff. I'd have flown the mission for him easy enough in 2 hours when the weather passed. I don't know what his problem was. What his problem was me. Go ahead, next slide. This is rice paddies. You're on a low and slow mission in a Huey. You're flying low and you're flying very slow. You're flying parallel to tree line, real close, and then you never do that because you fly parallel to tree line. And you can step one step out of the tree line. He's got 180 degrees worth of shooting he can do at you. If you do perpendicular, then he's only got a few seconds to shoot at you. We were wanting to get shot at. Worm on the end of a hook, and above us were two cobras, and when somebody would shoot at us, we'd see something, we'd throw smoke out and pull off, and the cobra would roll in and take care of it. Next slide. Triple canopy jungle, again, defoliated by Agent Orange, which does not hurt white people. You're on a people sniffer mission. There was a box that they put in your aircraft and ran a big tube up to the skid, and you flew low and you flew slow, and it would sniff the air. And there's something that humans give off, and when it registers, the guy will throw out smoke, and we'll pull off, and behind us is a little loach, part of a hunter-killer team, and they check out the area, and if they find something that the cobra will roll hot, if they can't handle it, they're calling the artillery or something. But that was always a lot of fun to do, and that was called a purple team. The slick was blue, cobra's red, and the loach is white. Put those together, that's purple. The cobra and the loach, red and white, pink team, that's the hunter-killer team. Next slide. We've been talking about, this is a loach, light observation helicopter, truly a sports car. This thing, it was wonderful to fly. You just turn on a dime, and you see the little woodpecker on the front there. Next slide. Cobra, gunship. This is guys from the Charlie Troop, 1st and 9th. These guys are crazy. If you ever watched Apocalypse Now, they were the ones that were surfing on the Saigon River or whatever, and they were that crazy. They were crazy people. Next slide. This is a purple team, Cobra. I'm in the lead with a slick, a Huey, and then the other side of me is a loach. And what we're doing is, you don't have a lot of fun in Vietnam. You got to do things, shake things up. So we're flying, coming in, and I call them lead ship. I call Papa Victor Tower, Papa 4-5, flight of 3, landing pole. 4-5, you're cleared, 2-7, whatever. And we did this specifically when there was a new kid on the radar. We got radar at one time toward the end. And so you'd hear him in the background. We'd keep our hear them in the background. And we'd overlap rotor blades. And that's interesting because if you ever tangle rotor blades, even on the ground, you're gone. But we 3 ships would overlap rotor blades, and on the radar screen, it become one blip. And you'd hear the little guy in the background saying, "Mayday, mayday!" We thought that was funny. We got chewed out a couple of times, but we still did it. We had a lot of fun. Next time. Didn't have anything else to do. Nighthawk Goose. This aircraft flew at night at 500 feet above the ground in concentric circles with, on the left side, the silver thing you see in the middle of the cargo bay is a holder for a starlight scope. And the tube, the cigar thing next to it, to the right of it, if you see it, is a minigun. And to the far side of the cargo bay is a canvas-covered Xeon searchlight, 1,000,000 candle-watt Xeon searchlight. This aircraft would fly at night, no lights, and you just fly in kind of circles, and you'd look for the enemy. And you'd hit him with a starlight scope, and you'd hose him down. Because, I mean, it just ruins everybody's day. And I didn't fly this regularly. I flew it 3 or 4 times to relieve the crew. But I was flying one night, and the crew chief says, "Look at this, Uncle Jack." Boom, he hits the light on, and there's this guy. Oh, he's a good soldier because he's high port arms. He's going through the night, sneaking around. And he looks up, and you could see, I mean, I saw his face. You look up, he says, "Oh my God, I screwed up." That's what the look he had. And then about 6 feet of flame came out of that minigun. The guy disappeared. It's a heck of a thing. But anyway, next slide. Sikorsky flying crane. It looks like a great big mosquito. This thing could lift the world. These big Rhone clouds that we use to clear LZs and the heavier pieces of artillery, 155s. This thing could carry them. Next slide. The Chinook, this is still in service today. We didn't use Chinooks to carry transport troops. It was a cargo aircraft, and they did mostly sling loads because it was quicker. He'd bring in a blivet of water, and that's rubber blivet. Ergo, you got rubber tasting water. And this could carry a 105 howitzer, could not carry a 155 howitzer. Again, you'll see the Rio Grande fence in front of the bunker to preclude the rocket propelled grenades from coming in. Again, this is rainy season. Next slide. You've seen live birds. This is a dead bird. This aircraft fell through triple canopy jungle, and everybody walked out. Crew of 3. Very forgiving aircraft. The way it's constructed has an A-frame, and it looks banged up, but they walked away from it. And the smoke in the background, that's not enemy fire. That's burning human waste. It's wonderful. Soot all over the place, almost like burning plastic. Soot all over. The next slide. Another loach, that 122 millimeter rocket hit behind this and just blew this thing away. The interesting thing is that ground has got a pentaprime on it, and for about 2 feet it was hard as concrete. That thing went in past the steel into the ground about 2 feet. Next slide. That's the deadliest killer on the battlefield. Not Jack Vaughn, but the scout pilot, the scout complex. As a scout pilot, you flew 2-3 feet above the ground. You just like trailing Indians. You followed footprints, you followed blood trails, you followed down. I've been down trails and look up, and my God, the trees are over me. And I had to back out of there. Your job was to find the enemy. You had 2 crew chiefs with M60 machine guns, and I had a 16 that was on a punching cord. There's a handle getting an aircraft there. We hung it on it, and I was good at flying with my knees and shooting and reloading. The average life expectancy of a scout pilot at one time was about 20 days. I flew for 3.5 months, lost 26 people in my platoon. One of the hardest things I ever had to do was write letters home. It was terrible. Or sending people out. It was easy. I made a list, and I don't care what the mission was, whoever's next one on the list went. Simple. Nobody can say I was being prejudiced. But that's the pink team, hunter killer, and as us young sky troopers, business was good. So what we always said. Walked around with a swagger, kind of crazy. Next slide. This we found a reinforced NVA company, and that's the Song Bay River, and we had pulled off, and those bombs are being dropped or by F-4 Phantoms, and after they get in and clean up the area, mess it up a bit, we'll go back in and do a bomb damage assessment to see how many we got killed or what we find down there, whatever. A lot of times we'd land and pick up souvenirs and sell them to the people back in Benoit. They like that. We had a business, Special Forces would have their little mountain yards make NVA flags, and we'd rub goat blood on them. We'd fly those suckers down to Benoit and Long Bend and sell them. I mean, they thought this was cool. They took them home and official NVA flag. Next slide. It was, hey, listen, made a little money. This is probably the deadliest killer in Vietnam, really. It's called an arc light. It's 500 meters wide, 1,000 meters long, and it's wall-to-wall 500-pound bombs. And these B-52s are dropping these things, I guess, a zillion miles away, and they fly in threes, and they drop those suckers. And they always told you that first light briefing where these things were going to be and what time. You did not want to be caught in that thing. Iranian bombs. Next slide. That's what Vietnam looked like, pockmarks that you can see one going from top to bottom and left to right, and it's almost wall-to-wall 500-pound bomb craters. And those bomb craters are pretty big. They're 10, 12, 15 feet wide. Next slide. This is taken a day. I made aircraft commander, and the reason I put this slide in here is you see this bullet bouncer I've got. It's a thing you put on your chest, and we didn't have any. You had a plexiglass windshield, which was 1/4 inch, and that wouldn't stop a 9mm. And then you had a chin bubble, same thickness. So you didn't have a lot between you and whatever's shooting at you in front. And so we wore these boots. We felt invincible. So we got a little bit too much to drink one night. And we got an AK-47, and we took one of these old bullet bouncers. We got about 10 yards away and went, bam! Bullet went right through the thing, cracked. We all sit there in silence. Oh my God, this is not what I hooped. And it was funny. Then we started rationalizing. Hey, wait a minute. We're only 10 yards away. If they're shooting us, they're at least 30 or 40, 50 yards away. So I'd be all right. But it was interesting that you can see that's how small that chair is. When you go into a hot LZ, I could get all of me and fly the aircraft behind that bullet bouncer. And they had a little slide that came out. I get behind that, my bullet bouncer, get out of there. It's amazing what you can do.
You have something under your seat?
Actually, you didn't have a lot under your seat, but you had something because bullets would come up through the bottom. They didn't put a lot of stuff down there. Your back had the big armor, and then they had 2 wings that came out, were pretty thick. But it's just one of those things. Anyway, next slide. This is the second insertion to a hot LZ. The smoke you see in the background, the first aircraft was shot down, and it's on fire. As we were coming in the second time, we thought we'd abandon the tactical approach because they were shooting at us. And so we came in real low and real quick, real fast. And as I was taking this picture, why was I taking pictures when I was getting shot at? It's what you do, earn a reputation of being a dumbass. But the peninsula of land about midway through the picture I was looking through, you could see they used green tracers. You could see the green tracers coming out, and I don't know whether my Peter pilot flew through them or just jumped over them, but anyway, that was it. And it's always bad when you get in a hot LZ because you always have to come back, and they know you're coming back. You have to come back, so they're ready for. Anyway, next slide. Nui Ba in the background always with the clouds. Still had to go up there, fly through. But this is elephant grass, about chest high. And one thing, elephant grass is very thick. And every time you went into an landing troops, landing infantry on the ground, you prep, which is again called LZ, everything's called LZ. You prep that with field artillery, and then if there was any gaps in the coverage, the Cobras would come in and shoot rockets. But the problem is that the elephant grass was so thick that it stopped the shrapnel. The shrapnel wasn't as effective as it normally is. And the other problem is when you're coming into one of these places, when you land a hill, you have to flare it, pull the nose up. And when you flare it, all the rock wash goes underneath your aircraft and spreads that stuff. And you're looking through your chin bubble because there could be an NBA guy sitting there with an AK-47 pointing at you. Never happened to me, but it happened to a friend of mine. And the only thing you haven't got any armament in front. The only thing you can do is land on him. That's what he did. About half a second, he just flipped it over and landed on him. He thought that was cool. He wanted to stop and get the guy, but wouldn't let him. But next slide. To the left of that picture, about a third of the way up, is Great Papa Juliet 6690 5560. In September 1969, we had been briefed that there was an aircraft shot down in this area, and we should be on the lookout for it. And we were flying log missions, bullets, food, whatever, out in the area of operation. And we saw what we thought was a pin flare. It's a pin flare is what it is, a pin. It's got a little knob, you pull it down and let it go, and the flare shoots up. And so everybody agreed it was a pin flare, made a left descending turn. As I went through 300 feet above the ground, the world came to an end. We flown into a helicopter ambush. And in about 30 seconds, every morning light on my aircraft, including the fire light, went off. And the only thing I'm looking at and seeing, to me, looked like millions of little ants down there shooting at me. And knew I couldn't land there because I wouldn't make it. So we got over this clearing, and we landed, and we were going through our emergency procedure. I was making my last call. There was a heavy gun team, 4 Cobras, about 30 seconds out, which is really good. But anyway, Coops, and remember that name. My crew chief came in and pulled. I was still in my harness, still sitting down, and he pulled my harness down so my chest was flat on my knees. And about that time, an AK-47 round entered the small of my back, around the kidney, and porpoised up to the top of my shoulder blade, just like a boat goes through water. Didn't know I'd been hit. But I looked to the right and saw all these enemy coming out of the tree line. And I said, holy dickens. And so we got out, and we were engaging the enemy. And of course, the gunships came in, and we were calling in Air Force and all this other stuff. And during that time, I think that one of the most, not exciting, adrenaline pumping times is that we engaged the enemy in hand-to-hand combat. And we neutralized him as an effective fighting force. And I promise you, I prayed that this son of a bitch would die, because I wouldn't have enough time to shoot at the others. But anyway, we got to the end, and we were on the ground for 2.5 hours, and the Air Force says, we ain't got anything left. Only thing we got is napalm. You're not supposed to drop napalm within a couple hundred meters of a friendly position. And so there was nothing left. They were still coming. And I said, whoever the call sign was, I said, bring it in my call. And drop that. The napalm has a nasty tendency to bounce. And they brought that big F4 Fountain comes in, and he's right on the deck. And all I ever found out the reason he did that was so it wouldn't bounce. And you see those 2 big silver tubes tumbling in the air, and you're praying. I mean, I prayed so hard that if I did half the things I promised God I would do, I'd embarrass St. Peter and all the rest of them. And I mean that seriously. There is no such thing as a foxhole. But the first one bounced, and it bounced away, which is good. The second one hit and exploded, and then the first one hit and exploded. And And then the next one came in and did the same thing. And it kind of broke Charlie's back. But we were on the ground for 2.5 hours. You're afraid, but you're not afraid. But afterwards, threw up an awful lot. Just went crazy. Next slide. This slide, when the guy put it's on its side. If you could, this is Koontz's head. It should be rotated this way. And he's in his little pocket back there in the transmission well. And this is Koontz. He has 90 minutes to live. We're on our way to extract an infantry company from one location and insert them in another. The extraction was uneventful. The insertion was a hot LZ. And as I was waiting for Koontz to yell go, which meant all the grunts were off the aircraft, which doesn't take a second. And I didn't hear him, and this is all happened in milliseconds. And I look back, and he's sitting there like this when in the picture. And he was sitting there just like that when I looked back, except he had no head. He caught a 50 caliber machine gun round in his head and blew his head off. And the guy that saved my life was dead. And I looked at my Peter pilot and said, "You have the aircraft." It's the first time I'd ever, in all those months, had I lost it. I think that's it. No more slides. Yeah, no more slides. Turn that thing off. War is hell and full of fright. Just had another firefight. Lead was flying and men were dying. All you heard was AK snapping. Flipped your iron to rock and roll. Squeezed the trigger till it was too hot to hold. And then Charlie's gone and you gather your dead. Dead man's weapon paled in the earth. His boots in front of his weapon, and his steel pot in the butt plate of his weapon is a traditional American salute to a fallen comrade. Time is too short to complete that ceremony, but I feel compelled to mention a few of my friends for whose benefits this was given. Charlie, drought. Max 49 Lima that night. Gun sight in a Cobra is a white dot of light on a prism. And it has a rheostat to dim it at night so that you won't become target fixated, hypnotized by it. Charlie's gun sight was broken in full-on position. He rolled hot on a 50 caliber machine gun nest, obviously became target fixated, and his aim was good. I found him next morning right amongst the 50 caliber machine gun nest. Charlie was 19 years old, the only son of Mr. and Miss Charles Strout Jr., a great guy, great American. Mike Blanchett, 17 years old, second lieutenant, who had received special dispensation to get his commission because he wasn't 18 yet. He was my replacement in Vietnam. I went through everything with Mike, basic training, AIT, and OCS. And I didn't know this until about 6 months ago. I left in March. Mike came in April, and in the same month, the Cav went into Cambodia, that 1970 campaign in Cambodia, and Mike received wounds, and he died from those wounds. Bob Bishop went through Army experience with him, training. Bob was a bright guy. I mean, he was bright. From upstate New York. I don't know how he died, but he did. And Ken Cruikshanks from Nashville, Tennessee. Didn't know Ken had died until he put the wall up, and one of the weekly news magazines had taken a picture of the wall, and there was his name, Ken Cruikshanks. You can never get away from this. I'm driving down the road, and you see something, and that sick feeling comes in your stomach. It's interesting. These young men stand in the unbroken line of patriots who have dared to die, so that freedom may live and grow and increase its blessings. Freedom lives, and through it they live, in a manner that's humbling to the understandings of most men. Unless you've been in combat, you will never know that the deep friendship, no, the deep love, and I mean love, with who? For the guys you serve with. It's certainly not the same kind of love you have with your spouse or with your wife or same, you'll be married. But it is, you'll die for these people, and they'll die for you. It's a very sad occurrence, but everybody says, when you're sitting there in a ceremony, you say, he screwed up, I'll never screw up. Knowing that's garbage, but it made you feel better. My tour was over, I think this, in March 1970, and I returned to the 91st Replacement Depot for an assignment to a Freedom Bird back home. And as I was standing on the flight line and watched that bird roll up to a halt, I was yelling and shouting enthusiastically. As the door opens and the FNGs begin to deplane, you see the look of fear and unknown in their faces. You fell silent, and those around me did likewise. And for the first time, I realized I'd made it. I was going home relatively unscathed. And I felt guilty about this because I had several of my friends who came home in another manner, and I had friends still there fighting. And then I knew what those guys 12 months before me had been thinking. But as we boarded the aircraft, and the aircraft took the active, and we became airborne, you heard the wheels lock in the wheel wells. And the plane banked to our first destination after Benoit, which was Okinawa. Plane banked to the left. I looked out the window and saw Vietnam for the last time. And I leaned back in my seat, and I think for the first time in 12 months, I slept. No more killing, no more dying, no more life and death decisions. I was going home. Now, the important thing is, what did I learn in Vietnam? How to fly my aircraft with my knees and neutralize the enemy at 1 and 2, 300 meters. I knew that they could take everything away from you. And you're standing naked before the world. And as long as you have your honor and your loyalty and your integrity, you have everything. If you told a man you would be someplace at 12:01, you'd be there, or you'd be dead. Just the way it was. My friends, knowing that I can't say anything in one sentence, asked me to sum up my tour of duty in Vietnam in one sentence. And the best I could come up with was hundreds of hours of sheer boredom, punctuated by moments of stark terror. And it was stark terror, but it was a lot of fun too. Met a lot of guys, and drank a lot of Kool-Aid, and had a big time. Vietnam was a very unpopular war, but I felt I had to go, and go I went. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it was the only war in town. And I thank you for putting up with me for an hour, listening to my tale, and I'm done. If y'all have any questions, I'll be happy to ask. If you don't have any questions, that's fine.
School and finished flight school, and that was 32 weeks. And then I went to served a year in Vietnam, and my year in Vietnam was March to March, and Mike Blanchett was my replacement. He came in April of 70, and I had left in March, that was when the Cav went into Cambodia for that big push over there, and Mike Blanchett got killed, and I didn't find out about that till gosh, years later, when we had a reunion, and Mike was a good guy, 17 years old. Charlie Drought, you remember him, the Max 49 Lima that night? Well, Charlie was, the gun sight on a Cobra is a white dot of light on a prism, and they have a switch to dim the light the little white dot of light at night so he wouldn't become target fixated, hypnotized. Well, Charlie's rheostat was broken and his white dot of light was on full bright. And he rolled hot on that machine gun nest and obviously got target fixation. And his aim was good because when they found him in the morning, he was right there and he had flown right into the machine gun nest. There's another guy, Ken Crookshanks, Tennessee Tech guy, that was my era, and he was a rebel rifle too. And I didn't know that Ken had died until they put a picture of the wall up and on one of the weekly news magazines, and there it was, Ken Crookshanks. You can't ever get away from this. Even today, I'll drive down the road and see something like red on the side of a mountain, and you just get this sick feeling in your stomach. It's those young men who gave their lives were friends. They stand in the unbroken line of patriots who have dared to die, so that freedom may live and grow and increase its blessings. They live, and through that, freedom lives. And through that, they live in a manner that's humbling to the most men. I remember the day that I left Vietnam and got down to Benoit, and the new guys, FNGs, were getting off the plane, and we were standing waiting our turn to get on the plane, and started yelling and screaming and shouting, enthusiastic, because we're going home. Hell, we're beating the odds. We're going home alive, relatively unscathed. And then I realized what those guys 12 months before had been feeling, and because I was sitting there, everybody was silent and contemplating their good fortune. But Vietnam was a very unpopular war. But I felt I had to go because my dad and other relatives went and served the country, and I love this place. And I went, and most of the time was a hell of a real good time. There were people asked me if I could sum up my tour in one sentence, and that's difficult for me, as you know. I can't. I'm vaccinated with a Victrola needle. Keep talking on everything, but it was hundreds of hours of sheer boredom and a lot of air, punctuated by moments of stark terror. And I never knew I could be that scared. And that was the biggest, as an antidote, I was worried because I was scared. I was afraid to do anything. And I've seen all the John Wayne movies, and those boys were brave. And the greatest thing in the world was when I found out that everybody was scared, just petrified. But the only difference between a brave man and a coward is the brave man does it. If you want to say he's stupid enough to go out there and get killed. Again, I would like to say that this Kiwanis Club is a lot like the Army. You guys, we do all kinds of, we don't get shot at, but we do all kinds of things together. Guys, and women, I'll catch hell for that. And you become a family. And for 45 years, I've lived with y'all. And God love you, 45 years you put up with me. I'll never forget you. And this is not my last day, the end of November. So you're just going to have to repeat this and do it better. But I want you to know, you got chicken today. But I thank each of you, for each of you are an integral part of this club, an integral part of me. And God bless you all, and it was an honor being with you. You guys are, I love you all. Thank you.